Hello again, and welcome to another session of World Religions. For this course, we're moving on now to Islam, and Islam has been one of those religions that came to the forefront, most specifically to most Americans, with what happened on 9/11. And unfortunately, that has come to represent a lot of people's thinking about Islam. However, most of Islam are peaceful, and we will see some of that as we go on, but we will have a session on radical Islam as well. But as we get started, let me share the screen with you, and we'll get going. Oops, gotta get the right place here. All right, well, as we start off on Islam here, you can see over on the left is the mosque that's in Kenya. I took this picture years ago there. They have a very large mosque. The majority of people in Kenya are Christian, but there is still a large number of Muslims. And then you see this overall view in Mecca of the great mosque, Masjid al-Haram. And it's this mosque surrounds the Kaaba, which is this cube here that we'll talk about later. And here's some symbols. This is a symbol, the name for Allah in Arabic. This is a symbol most people associate with Islam, but it's really not known as an Islamic symbol originally. It came with the Ottoman Turks who were Muslim, and so that was kind of their symbol, but it was never part of original Islam to begin with. But yet people are going to associate that. All right. Now, if you just were to take a map of the world, and we have this square or rectangle here. You see here what's called 1040 window. This area contains the world's largest population of non-Christians. The area extends from 10 degrees to 40 degrees north of the equator, stretches from North Africa across to China. Most of the people groups are Muslim or folk Muslim within this area. You do have other areas like this. Hinduism falls, India with a lot of Hindu fall in here as well. But you can see here the dark is Shia type of Islam, and the green is the Sunni. And we'll talk about the differences of those later. But if you were just to see where most of Islam is contained here, you have a lot down here in Indonesia. In fact, it's most densely populated area of Islam in the world. It kind of falls outside of this window. Islam is about 1.8 billion people, 24% of the world's population. It is the second largest world religion. Christianity being the largest at about 33%, 2.5 billion. Then it drops from there. This next religion would be Hinduism, which is now about the same as secular or non-religious or non-affiliated, which that group can be atheists, agnostics, or just people that just aren't affiliated with any particular religion, not necessarily that they're agnostic or atheists. So, but they give you an idea of the size of the population of Islam. It is a growing religion, so it's showing that it's continuing to grow, and that is, and of course, Christianity in some parts of the world is growing, but other parts it's not growing. Originally, and before Islam came along, that part of the world of Saudi Arabia, they worship multiple gods and goddesses, including Hubble, and he was kind of the chief god, and the goddess Al-Lat, and goddess Al-Uzza, and Manat. They had local shrines to them and temples, And the Kaaba, that cube there, which is what basically Kaaba means, was one of the places they had these statues set up. And so it was a sanctuary in pre-Islamic times. So that Kaaba dates back. Now it's been redone during Islamic times, but Muslims believe that Abraham, known to them as Ibrahim, in the Islamic tradition, and his son Ishmael. Notice it's not the one the Bible follows, but it points out that they constructed the Kaaba. Tradition holds that it was originally a simple, unroofed rectangular structure. The Quraysh tribe, who ruled Mecca, rebuilt the pre-Islamic Kaaba in about 608 CE, which is what we would say AD 608 for Christian calculation, with all alternating courses of masonry and wood. A door was raised above the ground level to protect the shrine from intruders and also floodwaters that would come along at times. Kaaba, meaning cube in Arabic, as I mentioned a minute ago, is square building, elegantly draped in silk cotton veil. It is kind of the central point of Mecca and the central point in the mosque there. It is the holiest shrine in all of Islam. Outsiders and non-Muslims are not allowed there at all. The pre-Islamic Kaaba housed the black stone and statues of the pagan gods. Muhammad reportedly cleansed the Kaaba of idols upon his victorious return to Mecca. He returning the shrine to the monotheism of Abraham. The black stone is believed to have been given to Ibrahim by the angel Gabriel, and is revered by all the Muslims. We would later see that Muhammad made his final pilgrimage in 632 Common Era, same year that he would die, and that would establish the thing that goes on, the Hajj, that goes on, the pilgrimage, it goes on year to year now, where millions of people come and make their pilgrimage to Mecca. That goes back to Muhammad's final pilgrimage in their history. The Kaaba is a interesting thing, and there's a short video. I'm hoping this shows up okay of the Kaaba. This is it here. All right. So I'll give you a little indication of what's inside that building there. Well, now we're going to look at the rise of Islam. And so rise of Islam, of course, comes with Muhammad coming on the scene. Muhammad was of the Quraysh tribe, though Saudi Arabia at that time was made up of a number of different tribes. But the Quraysh tribe is the one that Muhammad came from. He was born in 570 near Mecca. He was orphaned at age 6 and raised actually by his grandfather and then his uncle Abu Talib, who we'll see enters into a lot of the beginnings of Islam. Grew up in an idolatrous life and a lot of religious diversity. There were Jews, Christians, Zoroastrianism was common in that part of the world. Christianity had permeated that part of the world as well. And so he had all these influences. The Hanif, which means the pious one, they are the ones that worship the one God. If you're a Hanif, you worship one God. At this time, the Bible hadn't been translated into Arabic, so they didn't actually have a written scripture. Either Old Testament or New Testament was not readily. The Old Testament was translated into various languages, but not yet into Arabic, as with the New Testament, which even came later. But either case, most people think that Muhammad was illiterate, so he couldn't read anyway. But there's a lot of things not known about Muhammad in that area. There's a tradition of a journey early in his life as a child, with his uncle's caravan. He would do business by taking goods different places in caravans, and he learned this from his family, and later would marry into that as well. There were on one particular visit, they ran into a Syrian Nestorian monk, Christian monk, Bahira, and he was at this time, they figured he was aged 9 to 12 years old, and the monk prophesied that this person right there in front of me, Muhammad, would be a great prophet. And he had the mark between his shoulders to prove that. And he even prophesied, don't let the Jews know. Whatever. It would be later that the Jews would be seen in opposition to what Muhammad was doing. But that was the prophecy. How true that tradition is, we don't know, but it's been around for quite a bit, and there seems to be enough to think that maybe it is true. He would later, as he grew up, married a wealthy widow, Khadija, and he would enter her into the trade business that she already had. So he had a lot of opportunities to interact with many beliefs that he came in contact with along the way. So as we see then that Muhammad's background brought him, to say whether if he was illiterate, he would be able to listen to various beliefs. And this eventually would lead to his first vision. And so this section will talk about from 610 to 622, AD 610 to 622, from the time of his first revelation, the first vision from the angel Gabriel. And this happened while he was meditating on the Mount of Light. This would be Mount Thor. You can see down here, you can see the mountain over here on the left-hand side. And then the cave, apparently this is the cave. Traditionally, they say this is where he was when he received his first revelation, called the Cave of Hira. And the mountain overlooks what's called the plain of Arafat. And this is not far outside of Mecca. There, Gabriel spoke to him and just told him to recite. Now, notice, to tell him to write something down, he said to recite. And from that time on, basically, he became a very uncompromising prophet about who the one God is and what was expected. So he began his prophetic work right there in Mecca, which, of course, raised some issues right off. First of all, it was a polytheistic area, and the people there worship multiple gods. And here he's going to come in and really cause a stir. Arabia at that time was a thoroughfare for commerce, so there was a lot of contacts with other people and religions. Mecca particularly was a major oasis for trade, but there is where they had the temple with some 360 idols there. On the entrance, you could see Allah's three sensuous daughters. Al-Lat, Al-Manat, and Al-Uzza. You have the Kaaba also there. This is that cube-shaped shrine we just looked at. It was dedicated to the main god, Hubal. He was the one who controlled divination. So you can see there's polytheistic things, but a lot of divination and witchcraft involved with things as well. Built into the side was a meteorite, and that's that black stone we mentioned earlier. It's thought to have been a meteorite that became a sacred stone there, and because it had fallen down from heaven, and so that's the way of saying, that Gabriel gave it to Ibrahim in their thinking. Also within that area and so within that mosque system now is the well of Zamzam, which will be very important when we look at pilgrimage. But here on the right, there is the well of Zamzam. You can see the mosque in the background here, the insides. But over here, you can see the three sensuous daughters there, the goddesses. And so realizing that Muhammad came into a polytheistic situation, much like Paul did and the early Christians did when they began sharing the message of the gospel in Rome. And so we see some things that are similar in what was being faced by Muhammad, however, 600 years later. His main message at this time was oneness of God. There is only one God to whom people must submit. This is called the Tawhid, oneness. And so that, of course, that conflicted very much with the thinking of a lot of the people of that time, and certainly went against the Meccan leaders because they used that to, that drew people in. They made money off of the gods and goddesses. He also preached submission. People are obligated to submit to God's will, that one God. And then judgment. The day of judgment is coming to judge whether people obey God or not. And so right off, you can see some things that are in line with Christianity as far as oneness of God. We do believe in that, although a lot of Muslims would say, well, you believe in Trinity. But Trinity is one, but that's sometimes not seen by others. And we do believe we submit to God's will, and we do believe there is a judgment day coming. Well, we'll come back to his teachings later and as they're developed further on in Islam. The Hijra, immigration is the word, that is what that means, to Ethiopia. He, in 615, because of persecution, he went and found protection among Christians. Now, at this point in Islam, it really hadn't developed into a religion yet, but he thought of Jews and Christians as people of the book and felt in common with them because they did believe in one God. And so here he does go to Ethiopia, immigrates there for a while for protection among Christians. Well, as he's coming into conflict with the Meccan authorities and leaders, it's been suggested that this gave rise to one of the surahs. A surah is like a verse in the Quran, and that he was under a lot of pressure to compromise with the polytheistic ways. Now, this is probably before the time a lot of students who are in my class, but Solomon Rushdie would write a book, and he was a Muslim, and he named the book The Satanic Verses. And he talks about the fact that originally in the Quran, Surah 53 had the phrase, "Have you thought of Al-Lat and Al-Uzza and Manat, the third, the other, these are the exalted and they use a word that we're not sure how it's translated, but something like birds, whose intercession is approved, which seems to be pointing to the fact he's allowing for some polytheism there. However, later on, this verse got changed, and Solomon Rushdie, he pointed this out. Now, for all of his trouble, he was a scholar and writer, but he was condemned for this by Muslim authorities, and a fatwa was issued on him. In other words, an order that condemned him and said that he should be put to death for doing this thing that defamed the Quran, which is so sacred to Islam. To do anything contrary, to treat it in any way or to interpret it wrongly, brings a lot of bad consequences. And so the verse now reads, "Have ye seen Lot and Uzzah and another, the third Manat? What? For you the male sex, and for him the female. Behold, such would be indeed a division most unfair. These are nothing but names which ye have devised, ye and your fathers, for which Allah sent down no authority." Now it's moved from intercession is approved to no authority. Now, notice doesn't come from any Christian sources. All this is from Muslim sources. And even one Muslim writer argued later on that Satan put it on Muhammad's tongue. Now, that's interesting. I don't think most Muslim authorities would agree with that today. Some deny that it ever existed, or they say, well, if it was recording something that was interjected by a bystander. When we get into how the Quran was formed and other writings, we'll talk a little bit more about the Quran and how that came about. Then, as we move on in this time period from 610 to 622, you have the death of his wife and his uncle. So he lost the protection of his uncle's clan, who was the clan leader, and a new leader, Abd al-Uzza ibn Abd al-Muttalib, or easier for all of us to say, Abu Lahab, father of flames, became the leader. But it doesn't look like Muhammad had a good relationship with him and his wife, because in Surah 111, there's a negative view of them recorded. So basically, he's losing, his protection. So he would flee to the place called the Yathrib, or we call it today Medina. And so this immigration there, or sometimes we call it the flight to this location. Medina will become the place where he's going to start establishing Islam as a religion. So after 10 years, he did have a sizable following. At this point, they referred to their beliefs as Islam, meaning submission to God, and the word Muslims is referring to those who submit to God. And so that's the meaning of those terms. He would continue in conflict with Mecca, and in 622, the city fathers of Mecca expelled them, the Muslims, and because they were bad for business at the shrines, which you can understand why that would be. Because Mecca was the center of a lot of commerce, and that would be between Medina and Mecca, there was, they'd be in Mecca a lot. But Medina is about 211 miles from Mecca, so it's a little ways, but caravans were constantly running between the two. But every time they came in, Muslims would come in, and Muhammad, they would be rejecting the polytheistic things going on. And this just didn't sit well with city fathers who felt like they messed up their business. Well, while they're in Medina, a number of things help to establish them as a community and as a religion. They have what's called the first oath of Al Aqaba. Oath of the women is what it's called. Agreed to abstain from idol worship, cruelty, and falsehood. To lead a righteous life and believe in one God. Not bound at this point to fight for Muhammad. That it hasn't become part of the Islam at this point. You have a second oath of Al Aqaba, uh, where it says you listen and obey in every difficulty and ease. So they were coming up with various things that bound them as a religion, as a group of people that were following a certain belief. This gave birth to what was called the Ummah. And this was an independent Muslim community, so they saw themselves within the polytheistic world there of that time as this community of believers in the one God, known as Islam and Muslims. They would begin their own Islamic calendar, and they began it from the date, the year of the Hijrah, or the year of the immigration, July 16, 622. So realize that they go by a different calendar than we would go by. In Medina, you have an attempt to assassinate Muhammad. Apparently, the opposition to Islam at that point decided they get one person from each clan of the Quraysh tribe, which is Muhammad's tribe, and try to assassinate him. But he escaped the assassination attempt. He escaped with Abu Bakr, his father-in-law, to Medina. So, while he was visiting Mecca, they try to get rid of him. He sets up his home and the first mosque. So the city there got its new name, Medina al-Nabi, City of the Prophet, or just short, Medina. They would develop a constitution of sorts, setting out certain understandings of their community. They would have a section in the Constitution about immigrants. These were referring to Muhammad's followers that followed him from Mecca to Medina. Then you had the ones called the helpers, Muhammad's followers that developed while he was in Medina. They would also put together some law codes for Arabs and for Jews, because there was a large Jewish population there. And there were certain laws for Arabs that were separate from the laws for Jews, and the Jews didn't fare as well in what they could do as the Arabs could. There was generally freedom of religion, but that only happened if you acknowledged Muhammad's authority. So yes, you had freedom to worship as you chose, but you had to say that I recognize authority, so whatever eventually would be said, you would have to follow. At this point, they allowed a lot of variation, but that would change over time. So here we have this is time period when they're going to be able to take over Mecca. They'll eventually fight to take control of Mecca. And so some things are going to happen on the way towards that. They have a lot of raiding going on. You have to understand at this time period in Saudi Arabia, it was very much the basic way of life there is that different tribes and clans would raid other tribes and clans. And so the Muslims in Medina were raiding the caravans from Mecca whenever they came near Medina. And so the Nakala raid took place during the sacred month of Ramadan, and which was a break with the normal traditions. Now, we associate Ramadan, the holy month, with Islam, and that is part of Islam, but it existed as part of Arab tradition before that. And but the Muhammad's followers, they do a raid during that holy month, which was out of the norm. Usually they would cease the raiding during that time. And you can see a surah in the Quran that kind of deals with this. Uh, they ask you about the sacred month, about fighting therein. Say, fighting therein is great sin, but averting people from the way of Allah and disbelief in Him and preventing access to uh, al-Masjid al-Haram and the expulsion of its people therefrom are a greater evil in sight of Allah. So he's saying, yeah, it's an evil to fight during that time, but it's a greater evil to keep people away from the sight of Allah. And so basically, as it goes on here, it's basically going to allow for Muhammad to. I was just saying that I am allowed to do that because it would be a greater evil to allow this other stuff to go on. So this rating cemented the division between the Meckians and Muhammad and his followers. And eventually, raiding became kind of a religious duty or a jihad. Jihad just means strive or struggle, and it's used in a lot of ways. We tend to think of it today as this, terrorism doing jihad. Well, for most Muslims, it's going to be, they look at it as an internal struggle between good and evil within their life. Others do look at it in a political sense, and the radical do see it as a fight against other people who are not Muslim to one degree or another. Uh, but uh, but it became a religious duty and transcending the Arab customs. But as this goes on, more people are attracted to Muhammad, and he develops a large following at this point. So here you have a map of Medina here, and then Mecca down here, and they'll be raiding all through this area. Well, there is the Battle of Uhud. Uh, this is where you get Surah talking about those who die in a jihad uh, get the promise of paradise. Yeah, Muhammad is defeated because his followers failed to follow his directions, was the way he thought about it. But at this point, the idea became entrenched that if Muslims stay true to Islam, they will always succeed. And this is still today a very important understanding of Islam because they feel like that God will not let them fail if they're really doing what He says. So failure is seen as a loss of Allah's favor. You see the promise of paradise in Surah 3, 169. You don't see the idea of the 72 or 73 virgins who, this comes from the hadiths. We'll talk later about the different books and writings in Islam, but it's just a collection of some traditions that about Muhammad of that time period. And that's where that idea of the heavenly virgins waiting for people who die in jihad. But if you just look at Surah 3, 169 here, never think those who have been killed in the cause of Allah as dead, rather they are alive with the Lord receiving provision. And goes on, but basically just saying they're in paradise or heaven with God. And if you die for your faith in jihad, you're promised forgiveness automatically, which is there's no automatic forgiveness like in Christianity that, if you believe in Jesus, you automatically, if you're a follower, you get forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't like that in Islam as much. But if you die in jihad, you're assured of heaven, where otherwise that assurance isn't there like it is in Christianity. You have the siege of Medina in 627, the battle of what's called the Battle of the Ditch, and basically they dug a ditch around Medina to keep the cavalry away from the city, and they kept the Meckians at bay because they couldn't get the cavalry across, and then on top of that, there wasn't any water except in the city of Medina, and so eventually they just had to give up and go back to Mecca. At this same time period, 627, you have what's called the massacre of Khoraza, the Khoraza Jews, and there was a what was called, some people were saying part of the plans that weren't happening right for Muhammad, they were leaked to the enemy by the Jews. And so there was the killing of 600 to 700 men, and their property and their women and children were all taken. And the women and children were put into slavery. And this happened at that time period. And this is the beginning of where you're seeing Islam is less tolerant of those of different views. And that begins here, but it will continue on in various forms as Islam progresses. He tries to make a pilgrimage to Mecca in 628, but he's turned back. He's not welcomed by the Meckians. So he basically attacks Mecca in 630 and captures it and cleanses the Kaaba of all the idols. And so you have the submission of Mecca now. Now Mecca's in control of Muhammad. He's cleaning out all the polytheistic aspects of it. And you have other clans that are fighting against him, like the Battle of Hunyan, the defeat of Hawazan in 630. So this brings up the ability for Muhammad and his followers to now have control of Mecca. So his headquarters was still in Medina. So he makes a pilgrimage in March of 632, which is called the Greater Pilgrimage. This kind of becomes the symbol for all the pilgrimages to Mecca that go on and even go on today. And that's not long before his death. He dies, in June 8, 632. So a few months later, Muhammad dies. And so that's the beginning of Islam. And so the Kaaba becomes still remains the center, but now it's cleansed of all the polytheistic aspects. It's devoted to the worship of the one God, Allah. And so this is at a pilgrimage. You can see all the people surrounding it. They circle it. I think it's 7 times. And but there are other things they do. But when we get to Hajjs, we'll talk about that. And so here's a closer up view of that and the people going up and touching it and so forth. But millions of people each year go to Mecca to make this pilgrimage. But this is where we're going to stop this video, and the next video we'll pick up here, and we'll begin looking at the split that's going to occur with the death of Muhammad, and followers are going to split one of 2 ways. And so we'll be looking at that in the next video. So let me get out of this and stop sharing. So hope you'll tune in for the next video, and have a good day.